On this year's World IP Day, the Innovation Asset Collective is celebrating Canada's innovation economy by recognizing our members from coast to coast. The results of your work will help cement Canada's reputation as a world-class IP commercializing nation, now and for generations to come.
The collaboration between us and IAC, and I'm saying collaboration because at some points it's back and forth between AIS and IAC, as it should be. The intellectual property is not as straightforward and there are lots of back and forth. For example, it's very common for us to make decisions on which geographical regions we should file in, and that depends on internal factors and external. In both regards, we have been able to benefit from IAC.
I think what became clear to us working with IAC is the understanding of our markets. A couple of weeks after we joined, we noticed that there's a study online that was available from IAC to help us with the understanding of our markets in terms of IP. And that was a totally different perspective. Instead of trying to see how much money you can make by selling stuff, how much value can you create by registering the stuff you're creating, by making sure that it's protected, by making sure you have the right strategy to act upon it. I think that has been like a different mindset that we've seen at IAC, and that has helped us in reorienting the way we do things. So clear value to us.
For us, our organizational goals were really trying to focus on getting our IP strategy. IAC has been able to help us really focus as a team, and now we realize that it is critical, it is vital for us to make sure that we always have that IP hat on at all times.
IAC enables valuable support for IP growth in Canada. Since we became a member, they have strongly supported efforts to further protect our intangible assets beyond our existing patent portfolio. They're data-driven, have a great IP toolkit, and it's all delivered by an exceptional and knowledgeable team of people. The benefits that we've seen from working with IAC are immeasurable, and we're looking forward to continuing this relationship for years to come.
Canada is a nation of innovators, and IAC is focused on providing companies in the data-driven clean tech sector with better access to IP resources at all stages of their development. So today, let's celebrate Canadian innovation and the IAC member companies.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Tomitza Divic, Vice President Operations at Innovate BC, and I'm so thrilled to welcome you all here today on World IP Day, which I was very pleased to learn was a thing. And we were just chatting earlier today how lucky we are that we're not competing with International Donut Day. But if this session does happen to overlap with your breakfast or lunch, feel free to help yourselves. We're just so thrilled that we got such a great response to this event today, and that so many people are here to register to learn about IP fundamentals for growth. I understand that we have people from all over Canada joining us today, which is really remarkable. I myself am joining from Vancouver, which is located on the traditional and unceded territories of the Coast Salish people, including the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. And I would welcome you all, if you know which territory you're joining from, to add a comment in the chat. We'd love to hear where everyone is joining us from today. Before we begin, I wanted to introduce a quick video from the Parliamentary Secretary of Technology and Innovation for British Columbia, Brenda Bailey. So without further ado, I'll just cue in a quick video message from Parliamentary Secretary Bailey.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Brenda Bailey. I'm the MLA for Vancouver Falls Creek and the Parliamentary Secretary for Technology and Innovation. And I'm speaking to you from the legislature today, which is on the traditional territory of the Algonquin-speaking people, the Songhees and Esquimalt First Nations. As the Parliamentary Secretary for Technology and Innovation, and on behalf of the Government of British Columbia, I want to welcome everyone to today's webinar on IP fundamentals. And happy World IP Day. As outlined earlier this year in our Stronger BC Economic Plan, we have a new approach to economic policy, and we're investing in our booming innovation sector. As we know, technology and innovation are strong economic drivers in BC. So recently, we announced a new partnership between the province and the Innovation Asset Collective, the IAC, and our Crown Corporation, Innovate BC. This partnership was created as part of a national IP strategy to help Canadian businesses maximize the potential of their ideas and their products. This partnership aligns with the goals in our Stronger BC Economic Plan to strengthen innovation and provide British Columbians like you with better access to resources to help keep ownership of your amazing intangible assets. As many of you already know, now more than ever, IP is integral to growing firms and fueling innovation. I'm a firm believer that as BC's innovation economy continues to grow, so does the importance of supporting the development and retention of intellectual property. It's the base on which growth is founded and is indispensable in an innovative and creative economy that supports the collective welfare of all British Columbians. IP policy matters. It has important consequences. So we're working hard to keep business owners and entrepreneurs, like many of you joining here today, to better protect your ideas, to expand your reach, and ultimately to increase your profits. Fostering this type of work and important innovation will position our province as a global leader, while we create and keep jobs, ideas, and opportunities right here at home in BC. And as we are developing an IP strategy for British Columbia, I look forward to consulting with more businesses and other stakeholders across all sectors, with a focus on welcoming in more underrepresented groups to best inform our strategy. So I want to thank you for joining one of our first programs since we announced our partnership. I hope to see more of you at future information sessions, education events, and other opportunities for everything IP. And if there's something valuable that you learned from today's session, I encourage you to share it with other businesses, nonprofits, and entrepreneurs you know, so that we can continue to help BC's future innovators grow together and build a stronger economy for all. Enjoy the session, and I look forward to meeting and engaging with many of you along the way. Happy IP Day.
Thank you so much to Parliamentary Secretary Bailey for her remarks. As she mentioned, Innovate BC is thrilled to be partnering with the province of British Columbia and Innovation Asset Collective on a new IP partnership that is meant to provide more education, tools, and resources for companies to learn about IP and how they can develop their own IP strategies. This is something that is very important to the work that we do. Innovate BC we're a crown agency of the province of British Columbia under the Ministry of Jobs, Economic Recovery and Innovation. And our goal is really to help companies solve some of the world's biggest challenges and build great companies. And we know that having a solid IP strategy is fundamental to sustainable and successful growth of your business. Other types of tools and resources that we provide, we know companies need access to capital, so we have a lot of programs that help companies access capital to do research and try to commercialize their research, to partner with other organizations to develop pilots and test out their technologies, as well as access talent. We provide hiring grants to help companies hire the talent they need to help them grow and be successful. And another key area that Innovate BC operates in is providing educational tools, coaching, and mentorship to help companies grow and scale and build great companies. So again, we're very, very pleased about this partnership and this event today. We hope that you find it useful, that you learned something about it. And I'm so grateful already for all the comments that we're seeing from folks, that everybody is active and actively engaged in this session and letting us know where they're coming from. So once again, thank you all for your support and for joining today. I would like to now pass it on to our presenters. We have two fantastic speakers today, both with Innovation Asset Collective, Aaron Pisco, who is the Vice President of IP Strategy, and Laurie DeGraw, who is the Vice President of Partnerships and Member Engagement. Thank you so much for hosting this session today. I know that we have a lot to learn. They will be introducing some key items around IP strategy, the programming they're building to support the members in developing IP assets. So please join me in welcoming Aaron and Laurie, and have a great session, everyone. Hope you get something great out of this.
Thank you so much. What a great introduction. And I'm so pleased to be joining everybody today on World IP Day. I've worked in the intellectual property field for most of my career, and it's exciting to be able to speak with you all and maybe nerd out a little bit when it comes to IP strategy. So intellectual property is really on the forefront of the discussion, as we saw from the Parliamentary Secretary's message and what Tomika was just speaking about. So why does IP matter? It's such an exciting discussion today. And when you look at this S&P index, it really shows the story of how things have transitioned over the past 30 years. Back in the early 1970s, the intangible asset class, when you look at the S&P index, was barely present. It made up just 17% of the reporting on the value proposition of the assets. And now today, fast forward 30 years, we're at over 91% of the value proposition. So we've really seen a huge shift in the types of assets where businesses are finding value in today's economy. And with global innovation trends shifting and this digital transformation of society shifting, there's a new kind of economy, and that's the intangible economy. And if we just shift to the next slide, it's really important to think about how Canada plays on the world stage, and really why IAC came into play in the first place was because Canada launched a national innovation strategy, and IAC has a part to play in that to really help Canadian companies be able to grow and scale on that Canadian world stage. Because today, when we look at this quick graphic, really Canadian innovation is a small segment when you look at other G7 countries that are shown on this map, and we're really almost less than 1%. However, what the graph doesn't show in the behind the scenes data is that we have over about 56% of Canadian innovation. We're a huge driver on the innovation stage. But at the end of the day, our innovation contributions end up being owned by foreign entities. And why is that? A lot of this stems from the fact that Canadian entrepreneurs might be filing for patent protection, they might be filing and developing IP assets, but the end goal is often acquisition by a non-Canadian entity. And the number is only climbing when we have the diversification of some of the large IT players like RIM, like Nortel. We have patent pools forming around that. And there's a real dispersion among non-Canadian IP owners. So we're really here to try to help compete against that trend. We want to have our SMEs and the Canadian success stories. We want them to build their own portfolio and compete on that global stage and understand the value proposition they can achieve through their development of IP assets. So that gives you a brief overview. So why does having a strategy around this matters? Why can't you just sort of take an ad hoc approach? And it's really because there's a need for integration with your business strategy to be able to drive forward and generate and control the market that you're operating in. And this control comes through ownership of your IP and data assets that allow you to protect your competitive edge and really compete on that global scale, drive that market, drive the transactions you want, and be a power player in these discussions. Because at its core, intellectual property really helps drive and protect business value through the acquisition of these assets. And once it's built, it can really actively support long-term growth and the ability to scale on a global stage. So there's a few key principles that we want to keep in mind when you're in the context of your business. And it's that you can only leverage what you own and have access to. And you can only own those assets if you first can identify them within your business. What are they? And so you need to understand the value proposition you're looking to protect and understand the mechanisms that are out there that provide an opportunity for you to protect these value pieces. So I'm just going to quickly, this slide just gives a quick overview of the different types of IP. We're not going to go into them in any detail. There's probably a large spectrum of different understanding across this call. So the ones we really look to most commonly are patents for sort of new innovation, improvements in innovation, confidential information and trade secrets. So how do you lock down that confidential information when you're speaking to investors, when you're speaking with the public, when you're speaking even across your company? Copyright, owning your works, your information that you're producing within the company. It can be software code, algorithms, but it can be as simple as technical drawings. What happens to all the engineering drawings around your devices, your products that you come up with? Do you have the right ownership provisions in place for those? Industrial designs, they protect the look and the feel of your product without getting into the functionality. One of the most famous ones is, of course, the Coca-Cola bottle shape. You can recognize that anywhere. And then really having your branding strategy to support that. So how are people going to understand who you are when they're selecting your product or service from the marketplace? How are you showing up in the market? How do customers recognize who you are? And really protecting that value proposition you've put around those services. So when we think about all that, together. Next slide, please. Intellectual property is really everywhere in everyday business, and it can be a company's greatest crowning achievement, but it can also be a great downfall, because intellectual property is more than just a legal deliverable. It's a leadership deliverable, and it's really a deliverable that should resonate across your company as a whole. And there's a couple just quick stories I want to touch on. One is quite a famous case in the US, that there was a college professor who had developed a new technology. They were really excited about it, with a new chemical compound. And they, during prosecution, the examiner came across a thesis that was published by one of his students. And that thesis, unfortunately, was published and publicly available before he had filed his patent application. So there wasn't consideration in the strategy of developing a company around this new proprietary chemical compound of understanding what went into the public domain when you were working with your research students, when you're working within that community. So understanding what those frameworks need to be in place, what agreements you need to have in place, what timelines are part of your agreements. Do you need to have delay mechanisms in place? Does your employer appreciate those pieces? Another great story is within the city of Calgary, where I live. We have, if anyone's been here, any parking places downtown. Everyone uses Park Plus meters. They're everywhere. And that was really an innovation that was born from a couple of people who were employed by the city that weren't really there to innovate. That wasn't part of their job, but they came up with this great concept. And there was a need to make sure the ownership of that piece resided with the city, but the employment agreements they had in place at the time weren't necessarily built to support those mechanisms. So understanding that innovation can come from anywhere. It doesn't necessarily just come from your R&D team. It could come from your marketing team. It could come from a downstream team. It could come from your IT group. So making sure you have the right provisions in place in all your employment agreements, not just with your typical R&D researchers, is really important, because everybody has a role to play when it comes to development of intellectual property. And I love this quote by Jim Balsillie, our board chair. If you don't have a strategy in place for protecting and owning your intellectual property, it doesn't matter how much you put into it, it's always going to leak out. So we are here at IAC to try to help our member companies make sure that that leakage doesn't happen. So if we start thinking about IP strategy, and I'm just going to give you a brief overview of how IAC we think about it. There are lots of different approaches to strategy, but this is the way we like to break it down. 3 basic components. What's your edge? What is your product or service differentiation in the marketplace? What makes you unique? And really understanding that beyond your traditional elevator pitch and digging into those actual differentiating details. What makes someone choose your product? What gap are you filling within the market? What does that market need? What is that little nugget that you feel that your company has addressed through development of your products or services? Understanding where you fit is critical. And then what's available? Making sure you understand the landscape with which you're operating. What's available? What's not available? What does somebody else own that you might need access to for yourself to be able to operate? Doing these big picture thinking exercises when you're getting started before you go down into the details of thinking about your technology or developing a trademark, developing a patent asset, thinking about what a trade secret is. Really having an overview of what's available to you is of critical importance. And that's where an IP strategy comes in. When you think about your company and all you have to offer, and you think about it in these contexts, it can really help you bring together the pieces so you can look at the intersection point. What differentiators lie at the heart of your innovation that really set you apart, but also address the market need and are available to you? That's where you want to start focusing your strategy, and you can build out from there. There's always potential reasons for filing maybe outside that central point, but generally speaking, when you're starting out, that's where you want to focus and you find the biggest value proposition for your company. Next slide. So after talking about an IP strategy, if you think about your go forward approach, when you have an IP strategy, you're able to be forward looking and you're focused on the future. Whereas when you take maybe an ad hoc approach and you haven't done that thinking and that brainstorming, you can also be hindsight focused. capturing what you've already developed, what's already in play, what potentially you're already selling, instead of having a lens just to the future. So having a strategy really helps you be forward looking and having a lens always to provide a mechanism for revenue generation. You don't want to develop IP assets that don't support your business today, tomorrow, and where it's going down the road. The strategy allows you to better position yourself for market opportunities. If you understand the markets that you're planning to enter 5-10 years down the road, you can make sure you've started to develop assets in those jurisdictions, because unfortunately, in the IP world, time can be your enemy. From that first disclosure, that first filing, your clock starts ticking in terms of the availability for being able to capture opportunity in different markets. The other thing that a strategy can really help you with, especially as our investors like Innovate BC and the funding programs they're running, we see it with our other partners like SDTC, government funding, NSERC, and NRCan. They're really starting to be much more sophisticated when it comes to wanting to understand your IP strategy when it comes to financing and funding. They want to understand the innovation that they're funding can be protected, that you have a vision for how you're going to corner the market and capture that value back into your hopeful Canadian success story. And it really helps you enable decision making down the road as well. As opposed to having to take a reactive approach, you can take a proactive approach and enable your decision making to be forward looking. Next slide. But we all know nobody has an unlimited IP budget, and unsurprisingly, IP assets, and in particular patents, they all cost a lot of money. So this is another great reason for having a strategy, because you can't file on everything and you don't have an unlimited budget. So you need to look at the value proposition that your spectrum of potential opportunity can give you and make sure you're investing your dollars and where you're going to get that most bang for your buck. And it's one of the ways that IAC is really trying to work with our member companies is to really incentivize that IP spend, and Lori's going to speak to that shortly. So the strategy really helps having a targeted budget on the development of those assets and building an IP culture that helps you to drive and capture innovation in your business and build business support. You really need to plan not just for the short term, but you need to plan for the long term, because IP assets have a life, culture takes time to build, and there's costs associated with all of that. So just looking at that 1 to 2 year time frame, or thinking that once you've filed an asset, the cost is done, you need to understand that there's costs that come into play throughout the entire life cycle of an IP asset. So planning for that up front helps you build more value down the road. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Lori to speak about IAC as a whole and some of the program we offer, and then we'll take some questions at the end.
Thank you so much, Erin, and thanks so much to everyone for being here today. It's certainly a pleasure to speak with you on World IP Day, and we hope that you'll get a lot of value out of this session. I think that Erin has really well articulated why Canadian entrepreneurs need to be thinking about IP, the whole rationale about how it builds into your business strategy, and just how critically important this piece is in terms of thinking about how to create the longevity and success of a business. So IAC is here to help on that journey, and I'm going to give you a brief overview of this program and how it can help support Canadian clean tech SMEs. So obviously, we're focused on this mission around helping Canadian companies understand how to use IP as a strategic tool. This is something that the large global players know very, very well. And so we need to take over that strategic advantage and find ways to put it into play in order to create success. IAC is a program that was funded by the Federal Ministry of Innovation, Science and Economic Development. It's a pilot project, and what we're working on is demonstrating how the collective approach to running a program like this can really create some positive outcomes for Canadian SMEs, and can become a model that we roll out to ensure that this part of the innovation space continues to have great strength moving forward. IAC is the key pillar in the national IP strategy that was formed in 2018, 2019, and it also is the foundation for the consideration around IP needs of companies. So the way that the program was developed was, again, to help with understanding of the importance of IP, helping companies use their own IP position, but then also the collective position. I'll get into details on that momentarily. Really to do the things that Erin suggested around owning their own innovations, not becoming beholden to other foreign holders of that innovation. Having all of the information around market intelligence and knowing how to make really great decisions about where the business is moving and perhaps areas and pitfalls to stay away from. And then, of course, this collective approach, which is a really first of its kind in Canada. It's a very proven model elsewhere in the world, but we're excited to be bringing this program to Canadians for the first time. So the 4 areas, it's a holistically designed program to help in 4 key pillars around Canadian SME support. And so these areas are really through a very robust curriculum and education and strategy relating to IP. So this is to help Canadian business leaders and business owners understand what they need to know to speak this language. We've heard feedback about how it can be critical in terms of having really meaningful conversations and understanding how to position things with key service providers, legal advisors and consultants that business leaders work with. So having that foundational knowledge and then being able to put it into play. We also use the opportunity to in some cases, give members opportunities to network amongst themselves and share, exchange information, experiences, and also potentially find alignment in some cases we found. We also have a program around IP funding, which is a series of grants, and it's also an opportunity to continue to help companies develop their very best IP concepts. We run these quarterly and are usually making about $200,000 available per round. We've found that it's becoming very competitive, very interesting as our member companies gain knowledge. They're really coming forward with interesting ideas that will move their businesses forward. The IAC IP portfolio is the collective piece of this program. And in this case, we have a team dedicated to researching the marketplace for IP that IAC can acquire and hold on behalf of all of our member companies. So just to be clear about this, there has been misunderstandings in the past, those that think that we are taking IP from our member companies and that somehow that's being offered as a collective. That's not the case at all. This, as companies develop IP or if they come into the program with IP, it stays exactly within the ownership of that company. But what IAC is doing to supplement that and create a much larger portfolio than most SMEs could do on their own is we are also acquiring IP that's significant globally, something that would really become a deterrent to international players that might see an up and coming successful entry from Canada and try to, basically use an opportunity to persecute and put some prosecution in place in order to hold them back. So our IP portfolio is a mechanism to help protect that instance from happening and hopefully mitigate it entirely. The market intelligence piece is what I mentioned around the information sharing and the fact that we're generating quarterly, at least quarterly, in some cases more, landscape reports to help member companies understand in a really deep, meaningful way the latest that's happened within the clean tech space. They can then from that make great decisions, really well-informed decisions about where they plan to move with their IP strategy, the things that they want to think about around the evolution of their business. So essentially, this is the summary of the 4 pillars that I just mentioned to you. The IP education and strategy, setting that gold standard, making sure all of our business leaders know what they need to know. The funding, which comes in the piece of the grants, and there's also an IP credit, which I will explain at the end of this. The IP portfolio, where we're dedicating $10 million to acquiring IP on behalf of our member companies to make sure that they have that defensive mechanism. And then finally, the market intelligence reports, which is the detailed comprehensive reports We have 3 of these produced to date. So in the summary of our benefits, you can see all of the things we mentioned. The IP credit that I referenced as part of the sort of monetary piece of the program is that when new members come on board, they pay a $15,000 membership fee, but it's actually held as an IP credit for that company. So what we do is we want our companies to actually activate the information that they're learning and to move forward with IP development. So we hold an IP credit bank, and as the company spends money on IP wherever they're working in the world with whomever they're working in terms of service providers, they're able to submit those invoices and they're reimbursed right up to the full amount of their membership fee. We obviously are working with a lot of great partners across the country, and certainly really excited about the new partnership with the province of BC and Innovate BC. And we've been having a great momentum around speaking with BC companies already. We also work with the Business Development Bank of Canada. They were one of the early sponsors of the program and have been really meaningful partners in terms of working together. Another partner is the Council of Canadian Innovators. We work closely on a number of programming together, and I won't read this all through, but you can see there's a lot of alignment around the way that we think about IP and our approaches to IP. Obviously, we work closely with all the superclusters, but in particular, the digital technology supercluster is really well aligned with the work that we do with Canadian clean tech SME companies. And then we have a quote, the quote again from our board chair, Jim Balsillie, who's certainly a strong advocate and has been a key motivator of this entire file and in terms of IAC coming into development as well. So if you're interested in learning more about the program and what's involved in joining, if you're a Canadian entrepreneur and you would love to get access to all of these supports that are available through this program, we encourage you to reach out either through our website, or you can also email our business development lead, Russia, directly through this address.
We have a couple of good questions that have come in, Lori. Maybe I'll just read them out. So the first one was a question around, would you agree that the strength of your IP protection program is only as good as the amount of money that you have to defend your assets? This is a great question. It's something I think companies think and struggle with all the time. And while being able to defend your IP assets is important, I would have to say no. I think there's so much more value an IP program brings to the table than just with a pure risk-based approach. Although, of course, litigation is costly, and at the end of the day, you have to be able to enforce your assets, but really building that portfolio of strength around your value proposition can create a leverage position for you to be able to potentially negotiate and develop an edge in that space. And yes, you may be forced into a defense position at some point down the road, but that only arises from the fact that you've sort of cornered the market, and potentially there's an ability to leverage those assets in your build, or potentially drive to a secondary part of an piece of an agreement. So I think it's really important to have the growth of your portfolio around your value proposition, to think of that first, because the flip side of the risk piece is the growth piece. And if you haven't cornered the market and somehow tried to protect that edge, the flip side is it's not protected. It's in the public marketplace. So we had another question, Lori, about the ability to, if a company who's a member of IAC has already invested a lot on IP, they're wondering if they can apply the credits to past spend.
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. So the intention of the credit program is to help companies move forward with new ideation. So we're hoping that as our business leaders learn about IP, as they're gaining access to the market intelligence, that the IP credits are helping them to offset the costs that come as a result of that. If it were, though, that you had very recently had some IP expenses, we could certainly have a discussion to see how it lines up. But I can say that the spirit of the IP credit is intended to help offset future spending as a result of having been part of the program and being able to take advantage of some of that learning.
Great, thanks, Lori. We had another question about being able to elaborate on our grants and what they cover. Great question. So our grants are really intended to, like I said, incentivize IP spend. That spend is not limited to even asset generation. It can be around strategy framework. It can be agreements that surround your assets to support it. It can be the development of policy. And we do fund for our full member grants. We do run 3 programs for the different types of membership, which Lori spoke about. But it essentially, we run these programs, we run them quarterly, and the funding is capped of what you can apply for. And generally speaking, you can apply for up to either $10,000 or $20,000 per round, depending on your membership tier and what that looks like. So they're really meant to support your IP spend. You can't think of them as being able to cover the whole of the IP spend, but they're really meant to help offset some of the spending on those assets and programming.
I'll jump in there too, Erin. I saw a comment about the different tiers that we have in the program, and is there something for really early stage startups? I would say that a lot of our curriculum is built around, scaling businesses. A lot of them are global or about to be global, because we've recognized that there's really a need for that type of information in the marketplace. However, as we were developing the program, we also could recognize the fact that because IP is such a long game, and because even the earliest stage companies have to start thinking about IP early, because it takes years to develop an appropriate IP portfolio that aligns with the business strategy. So we have launched an associate member tier, which is a freemium version of the program. Essentially, it has some select educational opportunities. It also has a grant program. So there's an opportunity for some funding to help with IP development. It's at a smaller scale than the full membership, but it's available. Obviously, the IP credit doesn't come into play because there is no fee that can be reimbursed. But we do make the market intelligence reports available to associate members as well. And then the only last piece is the patent collective portfolio is not available to associate members until they're able to join as full members. So that's available as well. And certainly through the website, you can gain information on how to join as an associate member at no cost.
Great, thanks, Lori. I'm sorry, I'm trying to, I'm not doing a good job of trying to watch the chat and answer the questions. So we had a question about, there's a few patent specific questions. Maybe I'll take one of them and we'll see what else we can get to. It says, if we have a public disclosure coming up soon and are preparing to submit a provisional application, is there time as of now to join and participate before that event? I think the answer is yes, you can join anytime. Lori, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
No, absolutely. The answer is yes. And we will continue. There's no, sort of deadline around joining IAC. We do take on members throughout the course of the year. The only consideration may be that we're going to prorate the fee, because obviously you miss access to some of the grant rounds and some of the educational live programming. So then the fee and the potential member credit are prorated accordingly. But certainly we are welcoming members at all times. So please feel free to reach out anytime to get more information about that.
And I just wanted to mention a little bit about our education program. So the way we try to structure some of the learning opportunities at IAC, it's really from a business lens. It's not digging into the intricacies of, particular types of assets, but more taking a holistic approach to provide business leads, business owners, who's ever taken responsibility sort of for IP and IP adjacent activities within the company, to give them an understanding of building out that IP literacy, understand some of the basic foundational pieces, and really understanding like when you might need to engage an expert, but teach you how to be able to do some of the earlier legwork on your own. We understand that IP work is expensive and you do need specialized support with the help of experts, be them IP lawyers, patent agents, trademark agents down the road. But there are certain tools that you can do some of the heavy lifting on your own. So when you approach that service provider, you can control the spend and be really clear on what you need from them and have done some of that upfront thinking. And that's how the strategy piece can really help out. We just launched the first module of our strategy training in April of this year. Okay.
I'll just add a note
Okay.
here, Erin, about some of the questions we've had about how we handle drafting, you know, how we help with different filing, et cetera. The clarification is that we don't undertake that work ourselves. We are helping companies understand how to speak with their lawyers, their consultants, the people that they work with to draft and file and map out some of the actual IP action. So that's what the IP credit program is there for, to reimburse those expenses as they're incurred. So we're offering the educational curriculum, we're offering the funding and the kind of intelligence around it, but the work that is undertaken to file and draft and patent or even do research happens with your typical service providers.
Great. Thanks, Lori. So we have a whole bunch of questions around very specific patent application types. So a lot of our education programming, despite being a Canadian company or a Canadian organization that's looking to help Canadian companies grow and scale, we are providing information and training around all aspects of intellectual property, not just Canadian. So we do get into some details around PCT applications, which are patent cooperation treaty applications. We talk about development of trademark assets, understanding when trade secrets may be appropriate, when copyright is appropriate. We have some templates for around policy development. So really the spectrum of the pieces we try to cover are the ways in which your business may encounter IP. And one of the things I'm really excited about that we're currently developing is really trying to help businesses and companies recognize when they encounter a hurdle in their organization, that understand how IP might be able to help you solve that problem, or how you might be able to identify an IP issue that exists in your company that isn't readily apparent. So if X event is happening, understand what the underlying implications might be on some decisions you've made and be able to provide some coaching for that. Because we also do provide some advisory services to our members as they relate to our programming. We had a question about the collective element. We haven't talked about that so much, so we'll just give maybe a broad overview. The collective aspect of IAC is really around helping reduce barriers to entry, and we are building a portfolio of patent assets for targeted sectors within the clean tech space that really helps our members be able to compete and scale where we know there are potentially hurdles and roadblocks. Maybe there's something in the way, there's a company that holds a number of assets in the place. So it's really that collective action is better than individual action. And what you can do as a whole, as a collective group, is more powerful than what each individual company can do separately. Certainly you could reach out and ask for more information. We are actively building out that piece of our portfolio right now.
We have a question here, Erin, about how IAC works with academic institutions. I will say that we've been up and running now just for a little over a year. So the first focus was getting those 4 key pillars up and running as their own programming. However, we've had some excellent conversations with academic institutions across the country. We plan to continue to develop and become closer, because obviously a really important part of thinking about IP and innovation is how it moves from that research and all the great work that happens at the academic level, and then how does it become commercialized. So we have a number of very active conversations right now with universities across the country, and we expect that we'll be able to start sharing more detail about some specific activities that we have in place with them. But yeah, absolutely a critical part of anything related to innovation, and we're excited to have that opportunity to work with institutions across the country.
We had another question about the space in which we operate. So yes, we are operating in the data-driven clean tech space. It has quite a broad definition of what would fall in scope, but we are a clean tech focused organization at that point. Lori, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, sure. It was part of our contribution agreement with the federal government for the funding we received to run this program. And really, we know the critical prioritization of clean tech around climate change and looking for technologies to help mitigate climate change. So we see this as a huge opportunity in a large space that's incredibly meaningful. We think that it's only going to grow in importance. That being noted, we do know that we do get requests from other sectors occasionally. And we do understand that this model, as we prove the value of this collective, could potentially apply quite easily to other sectors. But at this stage, and especially in relation to the funding we received, clean tech companies are the focus and the requirement for eligibility for the program.
Great. We had another question about accessing experts. So at IAC, we have a wide variety of experts and there are advisory opportunities. But one of the things we are also working on compiling is being able to provide some access and information around external resourcing. Yes, we have a large network of people that we work with, and so we can help provide names of people potentially in your region that you're interested in working with, building connections. I know we're specific to some of our targeted programming around women in IP, we're looking at developing a community of practice where there would be opportunities to chat amongst peer groups and get cross recommendations as well. Then we had a second question around the timeline for grant applications. So the grant applications, our grant applications are quite different than typical grant applications in that it's really a 5-week turnaround cycle. From the time the grant opens to the time it closes to the review process to the awarding of funds is between 5 and 6 weeks. So, and they operate quarterly for full members and on a slightly different time scale for associate members.
I'll just add something while you read. I know you're catching up on questions there, Erin, for you. In relation to the grant program as well, we're told that the application process, filling out the application, it's not the heavy lifting that some might be accustomed to. So typically we hear it's about 45 minutes to an hour to fill out our application because we're looking for the general concept and again, how it lines to overall business strategy and moves the needle forward. So honestly, we want to support companies and we definitely want to reward the best ideas out there, not make a lot of extra work through this process. So we believe that it's in the right spot right now in terms of the required time, but then also being able to get the funding to these business leaders as quickly as possible.
We had another question around the collective element and how it works, and this is something we're actively working on. So how member companies are able to go about using the assets and if they can get a license to this IP. And the answer is actually kind of it depends on the set of circumstances, but we're really our lens is really towards enabling companies to be able to use the IP that's been acquired to their benefit, depending on the particular set of circumstances. So yes, it might be able to be licensed. Maybe it's just a tool that you have access to, and whether or not it can be limited to only Canadian corporations. So only Canadian corporations can be members. And Lori, I don't know if you want to touch quickly on what that looks like from a membership perspective of who can join IAC beyond the clean tech piece from a corporate perspective.
Yeah, thanks, Erin. So we have some eligibility requirements. Those are part of our membership agreement. And so depending on which tier is of interest, we can share those with you specifically. But how we determine whether or not a company is clean tech, and especially we have the extra layer of data driven, which we believe most clean tech companies are thinking about data and are using that to make most of their decisions. So that's a piece of it, making sure that that's the approach that companies are taking. But really, the way that we've defined clean tech is having that positive impact environmentally. It's not a really rigid definition, but we do have some language as well in the membership agreement. And it's important to note that, of course, this has to be a Canadian company as well. That's a really important part of the eligibility. So it appears we're running out of time here for our questions. It's been a great engagement and we really appreciate it. We're not going to be able to answer everything that's in the Q&A right now, and there were some specific ones. So we feel that if you have any specific follow-up, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We're more than happy to speak with you about anything related to your questions about IP or membership. And as Julia has just put in the chat, you can reach out to our business development lead, Resha, to help speak with you and explain further the eligibility and what's involved in joining as a member. So last thoughts are just to thank you so much for the invitation to be here today. Thank you so much to our partners at the province of BC and Innovate BC. It's been wonderful to host this event today, and we look forward to the next event very soon. And happy World IP Day, everyone.